All right, welcome back again. It is a pleasure from my side to see you again here with my reflections on multiple topics of management, education, climate change, and so on and so forth. Today, I'm going to discuss about my exploration and my reflection on the research methodology over the years, and especially over 3 weeks that I have been into a program that has actually changed a lot about my research thinking and research paradigm. And I'm going to actually share that one here. Okay. So, first of all, previously, I used to think that researcher is normally a curious mind rather than anything else. However, upon discussion in the class and then with the instructor and everybody else, I realized that there are four qualities of a researcher. The first is inquisitive mind. It's not only curious, but inquisitive mind. And then also it has some level of inclusive heart. And then also researcher has critical self-reflective knowledge. The fourth one is the context responsive accents. This one, the last one, actually mesmerized me in the most. Because earlier, I used to do research into positivist paradigm, and in positivist paradigm, normally you have the hypothesis, and then you have uh, data collection, and then analysis, and then acceptance or rejection of the hypothesis. So it is more theory-driven, deductive approach. And then when this concept of context responsive actions are actually introduced, I started to realize that how important is the qualitative paradigm. Even in quantitative paradigm, we need context and we need to respect the context. So that was an awakening, a reflection based on this understanding. And then when you look into the continuum of development of the research methodology since the past, so if you look into positivism, that's what I just discussed about it. Here, the researcher is a detached observer. The researcher does not get its reflections, its ideas, and its interpretation, and its influence into the writings and interpretation of the data. It is purely detached observer who actually establishes the relationship between theory and data, methods, and then also findings, and then tries to make sense of the world from these findings. Purely regression based models, right? If you have a long data sets for many years in a panel setting, you can run a panel data regression. If it is a time series data, you can run time series regressions and then also try to make sense of the world based on antecedents and then outcomes. Now, for example, I have been doing my research into business world, and then there I run panel regression. In panel regression, I normally look at the company performance, like for example, stakeholders' value creation for the company. Earlier, only shareholders were actually given the best meaning and then also best value, and then the shareholders' wealth maximization was the mantra. Recently, there is a nagging exposure and exploration from the Nobel laureates to others that this is somehow is not the world that we would like to have, because the climate science is giving an alarm for the world that is under crisis. At the same time, if you look into the social fabric, inequality, unrest, terrorism, and everything is actually growing. So when you look into this kind of conundrum, the only scalable model, only model that has scaled up and then profitability as the outcome for the companies has done tremendous wealth creation and also prosperity in the world. However, all the taxes paid by the firms and then also the taxes paid by the companies and individuals has not been utilized properly, either through the government mechanism, which is mostly inefficient and then bureaucratic mechanism, or through the plural sector, that is NGOs, INGOs, and civil societies, whose model also is somehow flawed because the impact they have, so they were supposed to impart, that means the development budget is quite not used properly and the impact is not there, and their administrative costs and then all overheads are more than 20-25%. In these kind of models, so the world is crying for help whether capitalism's most successful child, the individual freedom to have an enterprise, can solve this problem or not. So, like, for example, if I really want to understand how positivists think about this problem, is that so you find an antecedent that actually makes the all three P, that's the triple bottom line, profit, planetary benefits, and then also people's benefits, simultaneously satisfied. So that's the model that positivist actually would like to actually explore and have published in that domain as well. However, post-positivist, in that paradigm, the observer is detached observer, but with some exceptions. They have a reservations and they have remarks, and then they have also reflections on the data and analysis and interpretation. The third one comes into interpretivism. In interpretivism, the researcher is engaged, involved, and he or she is a cultural worker, he's a negotiator, she's a facilitator, and she is a co-researcher and bipolar. All of these roles are actually heavily on the interpretivism paradigm. This is the departure from positivism and post-positivism. So you got into interpretivism where you start becoming engaged. When this paradigm was also actually understood and the world actually was not even in better place, then further it went into developing criticalism as a paradigm. In criticalism, it's not only criticizing, but it's a constructive criticism with the solution of the problem that you're studying. So here, the researcher is an advocate, he is a resistor, she is a liberator, she's a jester, and she's a magician, alchemist, and whatever you call it as healer. So criticalism is something that beyond comprehension of the positivist and post-positivist paradigm. They never understood it. Neither me when before I actually started to look into this paradigm. So you have a critical eye, but at the same time, you're not only criticizing for the sake of criticism, but you're actually becoming part of the solution and providing the solution. You become the change maker, you become the advocator, you become the resistor, you become the liberator, and so on and so forth. Right? That's criticalism. And then beyond criticalism, also the world was not happy in understanding the reality, the multiple perspectives of the world, the realities, the truth, the change, whatever we were saying. And postmodernist actually got into picture. Okay. And they think like the researcher is a writer, is a reader, is a performer, is a painter, is an illustrator, is a composer, is a musician, is a poet, and is a cartoonist. So it's a postmodernist view of the researcher in paradigms and then the role of the researcher. Recently, like for example, Louis Toledo and then other colleagues and then professors from different parts of the world in educational paradigm, educational philosophy, they have been talking about integralism. And in this integralism, this most of these Post-positivism, interpretivism, no, not post-positivism, but interpretivism, criticalism, and postmodernism are actually embedded, and then they try to have a vision and then futurist way of thinking the world based on these multiple paradigms. In integralism, it is mixed approach to the paradigm and then also mixing the paradigms. Researchers normally don't want to mix the paradigms, but don't worry. There is a recent wave that some of the journals and then the publishers and then also reviewers and then our editors, journal editors, they are calling for paradigm shift, pragmatic approach, and also paradigm mixing. This gave me an awakening, and then also I started to think what is beyond this, and then what can be done in this integralism paradigm, right? So that's kind of the role of the researcher and the paradigms, and who is the researcher, right? So to understand all of these, you need to have a course like research methodology course, right? Normally, in this kind of courses where we have positivist paradigm, the people don't talk about most of the context and so on and so forth. They are looking for generalizable model, statistical significance, and then p-values, and then so on and so forth, betas, and so on and so forth, stars, and so on and so forth. However, in action research, in action research, the paradigm changes. In previous paradigms of hypothesis-driven world or even qualitative world, to understand those hypotheses for better, or even creation of a theory, that means inductive approach. The reasoning is to prove something. That means you have gone through the data, you have understood something, and you are proving something based on the data. If you have a theory, you are proving the theory, or if you are creating a reasoning with qualitative data, you are trying to triangulate and then make sense of it all. However, when you get into action research or practical action research, right, then it is a different story. First of all, finding a problem to solve is the biggest issue detection, issue finding approach in plan, act, observe, and reflect cycle. This cycle can be in multiple phases, multiple cycles. Like in planning, also you have to do that. When you have to act, also you have to do that cycle. And then when you have to observe, you have to do that cycle also. And when you reflect, you have to do the same cycle again. So far, my exploration has been to understand the issue. So I'm in a planning cycle of the issue detection of a school. In the first meeting I went to, I went to school and then met the principal and then key stakeholders like teachers and coordinators and so on and so forth. It's a plus two school in periphery of Kathmandu. And then I started to understand their quality challenges and so on and so forth. But as a researcher, I wanted to pinpoint the problem in a smaller scale and then understand and solve that for better. In doing that, I got a permission to get into a classroom and then ask students about their challenges in learning. So the following day, I went to the class where the principal itself was teaching. And I sat in the classroom and observed the class for a while, and then also later on, I asked a question, very simple question: how can we make your learning better? Or if the teacher has done this, what? How, if the teacher had done this, I would have learned better. Fill in the blanks, like a couple of points that you would like to have. And in doing that, I got almost everyone responded, and then I collected the responses, and then also took the photos, and then made a PDF, and started to have an interaction in the class. In the last class, I had a way of awakening when the facilitator told me that I can actually use these issues and repeated themes to write a poem. It's a poetic issue detection approach. And in that process, I have written a poem. Let's actually go through the poem. So this is the wish from the students, like what kind of classroom they really want to have. Like, for example, this is the poem that emerged from multiple themes that I had been actually going through from the material they gave me. I mean the responses they gave me. I wish my classroom where there is no fear, no hesitation, and no contradiction in teachers saying and doing, where interactions and participation flow with streams of reason as a river, where my childhood curiosity to act, experiment, reflect, and grow finds a way and meaning, where Sir and Miss make us work in small groups and give us feedback wherever we go wrong, where failure is not punished but learning from it becomes a norm. Let my teachers awake in understanding my wish to become a curious child forever. So this is how far I have been here, and I have a long way to go to understand the practical research, practical action research. And my wish is that one day I will actually master this. Perhaps I'll write a couple of good articles on this also, and then augment the, the gap in proving versus improving. In action research, we are actually improving. We're actually improving the problem or issue that we are actually tackling on. We don't just leave behind the issue and then prove it and then let the authors make the interpretation and suggestions and also the way of improving this. No, we as a researcher get into that. So the next phase, I'm going to actually develop mechanism how to actually make sure that this issue gets solved and implement that, observe that for a couple of months, and then go to the students again and ask as we improve. And if the student's response is predominantly give the poem, if response is that when I actually at the end read and reflect and then try to actually make sense of it, and at that time also I have a very beautiful poem that actually satisfies my quest for understanding and improving the classroom will be better. Until then, keep on watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you very much. It's Dr. Krishna from University of Helsinki and also University of Mathematics.